France is simmering. Between mass protests against high costs, widespread factory shutdowns, and growing backlash from former colonial ties, the economic pressure is building. One less obvious but critical factor: Africa pushing back, reclaiming resource control. And that's hitting French business in real ways. Today we unpack how that's unfolding and what it means globally, especially for the US. Inflation, energy costs, supply chain disruptions. France has been hit hard. Protesters cite rising cost of living, utility bills, fuel prices, and a sense that government isn't protecting working-class citizens. Factories in France are shutting down. According to West Africa Weekly, many of these closures stem from disruptions in supply chains, especially raw materials sourced from Africa, rising costs of energy, and increased competition. Meanwhile, Africa is no longer willing to accept old contracts or low royalty rates. Countries are demanding greater value, local processing, higher returns, reducing the asymmetrical flow of raw materials outwards. Tensions with Algeria have also escalated, affecting French companies that relied on Algerian markets or supply relationships. French firms there are seeing declining market share, regulatory pushback, and trade barriers. Energy and extraction companies are on the front line. Firms like Total Energies, which have historically operated in Africa for oil, gas, uranium, are now facing tougher terms, stricter regulations, and in some cases, contract renegotiations. Manufacturing sectors with high energy use, steel, chemical, metalworking, perhaps even automotive supply, are suffering from both higher input costs and supply disruptions. France's factory shutdowns are a signal that these energy-intensive industries are especially vulnerable. Financial ties via currency and banking are also affected. The CFA franc zone, a currency used by many former French colonies in Africa, is under criticism and reform pressures. Disruption or reform of that system could affect French banks and business operations in West and Central Africa. Also, companies that have built operations in Africa, whether in agriculture, mining, or infrastructure, are encountering increasing demands for local processing, environmental regulation, labor requirements, and revenue sharing. These raise costs and reduce margins. Protests have erupted across France. Workers, unions, students, many are calling out austerity, rising living costs, and what they see as France's failure to modernize its economic relationships with Africa. They want more fairness, more domestic investment, more control. The government is trying to respond with a mix of subsidies, energy support measures, and diplomatic efforts. But many believe it's too little, too late, especially for businesses already operating under squeezed margins. Diplomatically, France is trying to update its African policy. For years, a system of neo-colonial economic relationships persisted. Now, with many African countries rejecting old financial arrangements, monetary unions like the CFA franc, and demanding more sovereignty, Paris is being forced to adjust. Trade disruptions. French firms may reduce exports, shift supply lines, and possibly increase imports or local sourcing, driving niche markets for global competitors, including American suppliers. U.S. businesses that rely on French input goods or compete with French companies globally may see both risks and opportunities. For example, French shortages in certain raw materials might create procurement opportunities for U.S. firms. Investment risk. U.S. investors with exposure in French business, either through financial instruments or supply chain links, may see increased volatility. Geopolitical realignments. As African nations assert more control in resources, in trade policy, in foreign investment, U.S.-France influence in those regions could shift. The U.S. may be called upon more in diplomacy, aid, and trade policy in those regions. Also, global commodity markets, metals, minerals, uranium, etc., could fluctuate, influencing prices everywhere from tech supply chains to energy sectors. For French businesses, plan for supply chain shocks, consider alternative sourcing, anticipate higher regulatory costs, invest in energy efficiency. For nonprofits, NGOs, and international development, monitor how these shifting relationships impact aid, environmental standards, and local capacity in African partner countries. There may be more demand for equitable partnerships. For U.S. businesses, policymakers, consider strategic partnerships with African firms, consider supply chain resilience, Factor in risk from changing trade policies. Watch key metrics. Contracts being renegotiated in Africa, changes to the CFA. Franc or monetary zone policies. Factory output and closure trends in energy-intensive industries in France. Flows of raw materials formerly going to France now being used locally or going to alternate markets. France's economic crisis isn't just internal, it's a signal of a broader shift in the global order. As Africa reclaims control over its resources, long-standing presumption of predictable supply and economic ties are being disrupted. That shakes everything: businesses, governments, and everyday consumers. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more deep dives into global economics. See you next time.